Hey Blender fans, in this video I'm going to show you how to create your own texture maps using a mesh you're going to make in Blender, and then we can use that texture map and height map on another mesh in various projects. So let's start with our basic mesh. We're going to make a metal panel, kind of like a hull plating for a spaceship or a large piece of machinery. We're going to do Shift A to add a cube. And let's size it up pretty big just to make it easier to work with. So I'm going to press S for scale and 8. Okay. Now I want it to be a lot flatter. So SZ, we can shrink it down pretty thin. Now let's press Tab to get into edit mode. Make sure you're on face selection mode on the top left. Grab that top face and let's bevel it by pressing Control B. My bevel is going really weird. That's because the scale on this cube has not been applied. So what that means is, we shrunk it down vertically, right, on the Z-axis. If you go to your object here, look at this. It's 8 on the X, 8Y, but 0.4 on the Z. So we need to reset this to 1 for the bevel to really work normally. So to do that, press Control A and select Scale. So we just applied the scale. In other words, we kind of reset it as 1, but we're keeping it what it actually is in our viewport. So now we're good. So go back into edit mode with our top face selected, Control B to give a slight bevel. You can go maybe halfway down. It really doesn't matter at this point. But I like my creases in between my panels to be, real small and fine. So I'm going to keep it pretty small like that. You can also go to edge selection mode, grab this edge here, and we want to get all 4 of these edges on the bevel. One trick to do that quickly is with one edge selected, press Shift G and then select based on the length. So now all the edges with that exact same length are selected. And that did a lot of work for us, saved us some time. Now we're going to do bevel this, so Control B again. And I'm going to press the plus sign on my keyboard to add extra segments, which makes it, rounder and smoother. So I'm going to keep it like that. Click to confirm. All right. Now I'm going to add some screw hole cutouts, and then we're going to duplicate this with the array. So getting out of edit mode by pressing Tab, which makes us into object mode. I'm going to press Shift A and make a cylinder. I'm going to keep it at 32 vertices. That's fine. Move it up. So GZ. Press number 7 to get a flat above view. Now I'm going to put this cylinder right here, right in the corner. Now if I press the period key, or decimal, it basically zooms into whatever you have selected, which is a really nice way to get in close without zooming and panning and all that stuff. So I'm lining up my edges like that, but I'm going to shrink this down to about half the size of it that it was. And underneath, I'm going to go into Tab or Edit Mode, select this face. I'm going to press I for inset, raise this up a little bit, maybe S to scale it in, I inset again, E down, E to extrude it down, and then S to scale that in. So we're really just adding some shapes here. You'll see why in a second, because we're going to use this to cut a hole out of this. So GZ to move it downwards. I'm going to put it where it just kind of goes into our panel, and that's good. Now with the cylinder selected, we're going to press Shift and select the panel down below, and then Control minus. And you have to have I think it's the Bool Tools add-on enabled for this to work. So that it will, quickly do a Boolean without having to set up your modifiers manually, which it does for you right here. So we've got a Boolean on the panel. What does it cut? What's the cutting object? It's the cylinder we just made. So look, if I move this up and down, you'll see it cuts in to, we could even do a hole cut through. If the cylinder is tall enough, we can cut a hole through. But we don't want to do that. We just want a little indentation where a bolt would go. So that's good. Press 7 again to get to our above view. Zoom out with the minus key. Now I'm going with the cylinder selected. I'm going to add an array to duplicate this, and I'm going to make it go maybe 4 units. Oh, let's do -4. And maybe 5 iterations of that. And I'm going to align this middle bolt or bolt hole, whatever, with our red line on the grid. So just GY should do it. And there. Okay, awesome. And then we're going to duplicate this over on the other side. So Shift D and then X allows you to slide it perfectly on the x-axis. Let's try to space it evenly, just like the other one is. I just switched to wireframe mode to kind of help me get a better vision. There we go. Okay, cool. Now these bolt holes over here are not cutting out yet of the mesh. So I need to do that. So select the cylinders, shift select the panel, control minus, and there we go. Now it's hard to see it because the cylinders are in the way. So if you want to, you can select one of the cylinder arrays and press H to hide it. There we go. Now we can see the rivets or the holes. Select these, H to hide it. Cool. So we're done with our panel. So we're going to apply these booleans. So in your modifier tab, we're going to click on this little down arrow and press apply. And I think this was implemented in the version that I'm using, 2.91. It kind of changed how it works. There we go. It just looks a little bit different. Okay, now we've got our panel. It's all finished. We're going to press the above view, number 7. Use array to duplicate it next to itself. And let's make maybe 4 copies, just like that. And then we're going to do Shift D, Enter. And we're going to move this in exact number increments. So GY, let's try 4. Oh, we're going to need more than that. GY, I don't know, 16? Oh, look at that, perfect. Now that worked because I had scaled it up by 8. If you did a different number, then your numbers are going to be different. But I'm using numbers so that they're exact. I want this to be perfectly lined up, like to this vertices, to the pixel and beyond, right? So they're perfectly next to each other. Let's zoom out again. But I want the end result to be a seamless texture. So that means I want this to be a little bit more interesting than just square on square. I want to have an offset, just like the brick texture that you see so often. So GX, now 16 moved it all the way up. So if I do 8, there we go, perfect. Now this pattern, if we zoom in and render this, is going to be a seamless texture. Let me show you what I mean, but we have to set up our camera first. So our camera is down here, but we want our camera to be seeing this scene from above. So if you press Control-Alt-0, it will grab your active camera and match it to whatever your viewport sees. So this is half the battle. The other half is we need to go to the camera itself, the settings here, and change it from a perspective camera, which is a normal, optical camera, to an orthographic camera. Now, these don't actually exist in real life because they're impossible. There is no perspective to an orthographic view. It's almost not even 3-dimensional. So we are going to change our output to a square. Let's do 2048 by 2048. That changes our camera shape. Now, you can't zoom the camera up or down using your Z-axis. Z does pretty much nothing, but you have to change your orthographic scale. So we need to line this up just right to capture part of our texture, and the other halves will loop. So let's try to do it with numbers. Let's try 32. Let's look at our location. This is where it gets a little tricky. Sometimes you can get exact numbers in here. Other times you're not so lucky. Let's try 8 and 24 maybe. Oh, look at that. I can't quite explain it, but ignore Z. Z is nothing. Z doesn't do anything. But the X and the Y is offsetting my camera perfectly over here by the numbers on the grid to match up with my square panels. Okay, so 0 to get back into camera view. By the way, if you press 0 again, it gets you out of camera view. So 0 for camera view. And as you can see, it perfectly lines up with the squares. Awesome, right there. Zoom out again. Now, if I render this, let's see what it looks like. I have a sun object already. Pretty boring. I mean, it looks cool. It's definitely usable. But we're going to render the height map. A height map just shows the 3-dimensional aspect of a scene in black and white. So to do that, it's really easy. We're going to first go to our camera view. Go to, oh, by the way, I need to use cycles for this. Oh, actually, I don't know if you need to use cycles. I just like to use cycles because I know it's more realistic. So go to your camera tab, go to viewport display and turn on mist. So mist is basically a way to add atmosphere. As your scene goes farther and farther away, you can add, white mist or really kind of a color gradient in 3 dimensions. But we're going to use this in a clever way to give us a height map. So with that turned on, Go to your world setting. Now we have a mist pass here. And here are two number values we need to get just right. So we need to actually see this from the side. So press number 1. And see this yellow line right here? This is our depth of our mist. We need to change our start point to being right on top of the topmost part of our panel. So let's zoom in, pan down, zoom in again. Okay, maybe zoom in a little bit more. So our start needs to be, you can hold shift, by the way, while you click and drag something like this to make it more exact. So right there, our white dot is on top, and we need our bottom white dot to be on the bottom. So the depth is how thick. What is the depth of your fog? Well, in this case, it's really, really narrow. Now, one more thing we need to do to get this mist pass visible and savable as an image is we need to turn on the mist pass. So go to your passes tab and make sure mist is checked right there. You can also check normal if you want to render a normal map and save that as well. So let's hit F12 to render it. And here it is. It looks exactly the same as it did before. However, you can change which layer of your render you're viewing by going to passes. Now we only want to look at the mist pass, and look at that. It's white on transparent. We don't want transparent. So let's change this little thing up here to color. Now it's just black and white. There's no alpha, no transparency. So black is actually closest to the camera and white is farthest away. We can invert that later. That's easy. But this is what we want, a black and white representation of the height of the mesh we made. We can use this simple texture image. Hey, this looks like a funny face, doesn't it? We can use this simple image to give shape and geometry to a flat mesh without really adding geometry to that mesh. So we've got this saved. Let's go ahead and file save as. There it is. And you can also view the normal, where is it? Normal layer. And now we have a normals map, perfectly calculated by Blender. Now I've encountered a few issues with using these. I think I still have some things to learn about normals and normal maps, but you can save this if you want. If you know more than I do about normals, here's how to make a normals map right here. And you do have to have normals turned on in your passes right there. I've got normal turned on. All right, now before we stick this texture onto a low poly mesh, I want to show you a quick little hack you can do in Photoshop to give you an additional map to play with. So we're going to blur this whole thing. And you can also do this in Krita or in GIMP, which are free editing softwares, great for manipulating textures and things like that for Blender. But we're going to just Gaussian blur this whole thing, and it's going to give us kind of like a edge or rust map, if you will. So I'm going to increase the brightness of the whites by doing Control L, which is your levels. Again, Krita and GIMP have these tools as well. We're going to make it really white. The black is still black, so that's good. And then we're going to go to Filter, Blur, and Gaussian Blur, and blur it, I don't know, maybe 20. Hit Enter, and I'm going to file, save this as a different map. Don't save over the old one. Whole plating blur, just so I know this is the blurred version, which I can use for adding, rust or cavity. So we can use this map later to add rust or, just cavity detail, things like that to it. So we're done with this. Close your editing program. Let's have some fun with this texture we just made in Blender. So I'm going to make a new file. Here we go. Now I'm going to start with a cube, and we can do some more complex shapes next. So here's just a basic cube, and we're going to add this texture to the cube. So to do that, I need to open that thing I just closed, which is the shader editor. Here we go. Let's make a new material. Name it whole plating. Hey, I didn't misspell it. That's great. Now, it looks like there's nothing in this window, but there actually is. We just need to find it. Or you can press the period key to center your view on these nodes. Now, with the Printable BSDF selected, I'm going to press Control T, which brings up this really cool little shortcut. This only works if you have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, which I highly suggest you do. And now we're going to find the texture we just made. So I put it in my textures folder. Here is the blurred version and the normal and the height map. So I'm going to open the height map, and here we go. This looks terrible. That's okay. I actually don't want this image to be going into the color input. So I'm going to unplug this, and I'm going to do Shift A, search for bump. The bump node is really cool because it can take an image data, black and white, and it's going to turn it into a bump map on your mesh, which kind of simulates geometry and shape. And the highlights and shadows will, follow along the fake geometry that's being made by the bump map. So let's turn this to non-color, plug in your image texture into height, and turn these down quite a bit. Let's do 0.5 for both of them just for starters, and then plug your normal into the normal of the BSDF. Now it's really hard to see, but there is a little faint bump map happening already, but it's super weak because we need to UV wrap this correctly and maybe add some lights. So let's change this top view to the UV editor, which is our UV unwrapping. By the way, if you have no clue what UV unwrapping is, you may want to back up and go watch my other 2 videos about UV unwrapping because you'll learn a lot. So tab into edit mode, select all the faces by pressing A. By the way, I think you need to be in face mode for this. And then press U for unwrap. And let's just try Smart UV project. Let's see what that does. It gives us these cubes all lined up like this. So I want to expand these to be perfectly lined up with these squares, or maybe 2 or 3 times larger than these squares. So we'll have multiple hull plating on each face. So we can press S to scale, but it usually will scale from the center if you have, a median point selected or bounding box. We don't want that. We want to scale from the 2D cursor, but we need to put the 2D cursor perfectly down here in this bottom corner. To do that, I'm going to right click. For me, it's right click. Select this bottom vertices down here on the UV, and then I'm going to press Shift S and put my cursor to selected. So now look, my 2D cursor is perfectly on that corner. Now I can change this to scale on the 2D cursor with all the points selected. Watch this, S. Look at that. Everything's perfect. So now if I do this, let's see how this changes everything. I can barely see it. Let me go to rendered view. There we go. Rendered view helps. And I'm in Eevee right now. I want to be using cycles. You can keep it as Eevee if you'd like. Okay, cool. Now I can scale it even more by pressing S2, 2 times larger. Look, there's more plating. That looks cool, right? It's kind of repeating like I wanted, sort of like a brick texture. I can do S2 again, make it a really large object, big metal plated cube of doom. Cool. Now this top one isn't quite lining up. I can probably fix that though by maybe selecting this top face. If I press period, it shows that it's way up here. Remember, because we scaled things up, right? Let's try rotating this by 90 degrees and see if that fixes it. So median point R90. Oh, it did on this side, but on this side still doesn't quite line up. I don't know if there's a perfect fix for that. Maybe if I GY, move it on the Y-axis. Maybe if I zoom in. Oh yeah, there we go. Zooming in gives you more fidelity, whatever. Okay, so I'm happy with that. All the lines are lining up, and that is great. Let's go back to our shader editor. Also, I noticed that based on where my light is, these platings are not actually popping out like I want them to. They're going in. They're reverse. Because remember when we made that height map, the high points were black and the low points were white. That's the opposite of what you want. So the bump map has this clever little switch here, invert, and now, that's the look I want. I wanted extruding panels of metal. So that's cool. Now let's bring in our blur map and see what we can do with that. So we can click on this height map image texture node, Shift D to duplicate it, click on the file folder open button, select our blur image, and let's Shift A and create an RGB mix. Where is it? Or mix RGB. You can type in mix. There we go. Let's mix between white and dark red. Plug it into your color, base color. Now, normally we can crossfade between color 1, which is white, and color 2, which is that rusty red. But if we use our blurred image as a mask, we can plug it into factor. And now, well, I can't really see what it's doing too strongly, but there should be red in the crevices. It's just not quite dark enough. It's a faint image. So let's help it out by adding some more contrast. We can use a curve, RGB curve node. If we darken it, or maybe it's brighten. Yeah, it's inverted. So if I brighten the mask, it is allowing us to see a little bit more of that the red cavity part. Maybe add more blur in Photoshop if you want it to be more, spread a little bit further. Cool, so that's a cube. Let's zoom out and move this out of the way. Let's try a sphere. So Shift A, UV sphere. Let's add some additional faces, 80 and 40. I'm going to size it up by 8. Now with our UV sphere created, we can go to our materials tab and select the already made hole plating texture. And there we go. That looks terrible. But we just need to UV unwrap it. That's all. Now spheres are a little tricky. They do have quads, but on the very tip where the pull is actually tris or triangles. See, there's 3 sides to each of these faces. You can't really unwrap a triangle properly on a square image. It just doesn't quite work right, not for what we're doing at least. So I'm going to select the pole here by, you can do a number 7 for a top view, and then Alt 7, or Control 7, sorry, to get the opposite bottom view. 7 and Control 7. And then C for circle, I'm going to select these faces right there. So I've got both poles selected. See, top and bottom. Now I want to grab everything opposite of that. So Control I to invert my selection. There we go. That just saved me a lot of time. So with this selected, I'm going to change my top view to UV editor. And I don't know where my image is. It's like zoomed out a lot. There it is, way down here. Okay, so with my faces selected, U for unwrap, smart UV project, enter. Now I've got all these weird kind of different sides of the sphere unwrapped, but I want them to be in a grid. Oh, by the way, let's change this background to the height map. There we go. So with these selected, you can press A to select all, press UV, and go to grid, UVs to grid with respect to shape. Now you need to have the UV squares add-on added for this to work. It's a great little free add-on. All these add-ons are free, by the way, that I've said so far. And this just allows you to unwrap things in a real nice grid way. I'll show you how it works. So yeah, when you do UV unwrap with respect to shape, it actually keeps the rectangular shape there, and we get them all packed tightly, perfectly like this, which is great. Now this is rotated, so I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. Now I'm going to scale it up, and if you look at our sphere, look what's happening. All those little squares, let me turn off the overlay. All those little squares are getting wrapped. So if I have my grid really small, the textures of my image in the background, or it's back here, are really big. If we size it up, it gets different. By the way, I think this does need to be back like this. There we go. So it looks like a brick texture right now, but really it's sci-fi spaceship hull. Now, if you notice around the equator, it's stretched a lot. We can fix that by kind of grabbing that ring SX and scale it on the X axis to fix the proportions so that I like to look at the screw holes, make sure that the circle is a perfect circle. So there we go. That's good. But if you do the equator good and you go to the top, then the top is kind of stretched. So if you really want to be exact and make a really nice, sci-fi sphere like this, you'll need to kind of grab each ring, size it proportionally, and then the equator will be, what is it, like narrower, and the poles will be wider. I don't know. If that makes any sense at all, I hope it does. But I'm not going to do that right now. But that looks pretty cool. So what is the purpose of this? Why am I making this silly little texture and applying it to this sphere? Well, this is a very popular technique that saves a lot of computing power. I would have had to do a lot of editing and have a lot of faces to do these little cutouts and these little edges and bevels around this whole sphere. And boy, that would have taken a lot of time, right? What a waste of time that would have been. Instead, I use a texture to get the same result. By the way, these faces are driving me crazy. See how you can see all these squares? To fix that, we're going to shade this as smooth. Let me do that. So with your object selected, if you want to make it smooth, press W and choose Shade Smooth. Ah, that's so much better. If you have a curved object like a sphere, an organic shape, or even a cylinder, make sure to do Shade Smooth, and then go down here to your little object properties and check in the normals panel, auto smooth. That'll keep your right angles sharp if you are working with something like a cylinder. So like I was saying, using a texture to give the illusion of shape and depth and modeling and what we call just geometry, this is an illusion, but that's saving a lot of computing power because this is a low poly sphere. I mean, maybe not super low poly, but it could be worse. If I modeled all this, it would have been super high poly. So it's saving me time. It's saving the computer time. This is how games are made. Games have textures for height maps and bump maps and displacement and all these things that otherwise would have required a lot more processing power. Now it's all being tricked and done as an illusion with an image map. And far away, it looks great. It's really only when you zoom in really close and at the right angle, you can tell, oh, this is actually just a totally flat sphere, right? There's no depth to that cut. It's not actually cut. It's just pixels that give me the illusion of shadow and highlights if I zoom out. And the cool thing about bump maps is that they do respond to where your light is. So if I make this a reflective texture, which I think it is, let me see. Texture surface. Oh, it's not. Let's turn the metallic up. Oh, yeah, it's nice. And the specular up and the roughness down. Ooh, look at that shiny sphere. Beautiful. I like it. So it's a shiny sphere. So watch, if I grab my light object over here, my light, and just rotate it, look at the highlights. Isn't that cool? This is a flat sphere, y'all, but it's giving me the illusion of geometry because the bump map is doing its thing. And bump maps are not new. I mean, old CGI was like built around bump maps because they couldn't model a whole lot and render a whole lot. So bump maps are where it's at, and they're still around because they do this great stuff. And it just saves a lot of processing power and modeling time. So I would love to see you guys be really creative with this. Make some really elaborate, like greeble meshes. Like I made a really basic panel. This is just a flat square with an edge and bolts. But I encourage you guys make something crazy. Make some like grid flooring with pipes underneath. Make greeble squares and access panels and computer microchip pieces. Do whatever you want and turn it into a height map, and then use that somewhere else, and you'll get almost the same effect. It's not as good as a modeled surface, of course, but you'll get almost as good, and it's so much faster for the rendering and the modeling. If you're far away from that surface, it does the trick. It looks good and it saves everybody time. So I hope you enjoyed this technique. I hope you will utilize it in your projects. And I also hope you'll subscribe to my channel because I work pretty hard to make this stuff. And I know a lot of you guys love this stuff. So subscribe so that I know you like what I'm making and so that you won't miss future videos that are coming out very soon. Thanks for watching and have a great week.